For 11 straight years, she was arguably the most powerful woman on the planet. And even decades after she left office, Margaret Thatcher is still one of the most transformative and, let's be honest, most controversial leaders of the 20th century. So in this explainer, we're going to dive into her incredible rise, her radical revolution, and the polarizing legacy she left behind.
All right, let's start with that nickname, the Iron Lady. Where did that come from? Well, back in 1976, she gave a fiery speech against Soviet communism. A journalist for the USSR's army newspaper shot back, calling her the Iron Lady. Now, he meant it as an insult, right? But Thatcher, she absolutely loved it. She immediately made it her own, a symbol of her strength and her refusal to compromise.
You know, her journey to the top was anything but typical. Back then, British politics was a real old boys club, full of aristocrats. Margaret Thatcher? She was the ultimate outsider, starting her life a million miles away from the halls of power. I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows just pure, raw determination. She wasn't your typical politician. First, she was a trained research chemist, and then she became a tax lawyer. That background gave her this methodical, almost scientific approach that was so different from her peers. To go from living in a flat above her dad's grocery shop, all the way to Oxford, then to the bar, into Parliament, and then, against all the odds, winning the leadership of the Conservative Party in '75, it's just a remarkable story. Now, to really get why Thatcher came to power, you have to understand just how bleak things were in Britain in the late 1970s. I'm not exaggerating when I say the country felt like it was on its knees, stuck in what everyone started calling the winter of discontent. The whole country was basically grinding to a halt. Inflation was out of control, the economy was stagnant, and powerful unions were calling strike after strike. You had garbage piling up in the streets, the dead were going unburied. There was a genuine fear, even at the very top of government, that British democracy itself might actually collapse. The nation was absolutely desperate for a change. And that was the backdrop for the 1979 election. The Conservatives came up with this brilliantly simple and brutally effective slogan. It just perfectly captured how frustrated everyone was feeling. The result? A historic win that made Margaret Thatcher Britain's first ever female prime minister. And once she was in power, she didn't just want to manage the country. Oh no, she wanted to fundamentally remake it. What came next was a period of such radical, confrontational change that it's often just called the Thatcher Revolution. So what exactly is Thatcherism? Well, at its core, it was a complete rejection of the way Britain had been run since World War II. She believed in free markets, which meant rolling back the state, unleashing private companies, and crucially, breaking what she saw as the stranglehold the trade unions had on the entire British economy. In her first couple of years, her policies, what some called her tough medicine of spending cuts and high interest rates, led to massive unemployment and even riots. A lot of people, including many in her own party, were begging her to change course, to make a U-turn. Her response at the 1980 party conference became her most famous line. It was a crystal clear message. She was not backing down. Her plan at home pretty much rested on three main pillars. First, take on the unions to stop the constant threat of strikes. Second, privatization. She sold off huge state-owned companies like British Telecom and British Gas, convinced that private ownership would make them more efficient. And third, deregulation, which most famously led to the Big Bang that completely transformed the City of London into the global financial powerhouse it is today. Now, the defining battle over the unions was the massive year-long miners' strike in 1984. This quote really captures how she saw it. For Thatcher, this wasn't just some industrial dispute over jobs. It was a fight for the future of the country. She actually framed the militant union leadership as an enemy within, one that was threatening the power of the elected government. Her government's eventual victory was an absolutely crushing defeat for the union movement. And the results? Well, they were pretty stark. In 1979, the year she took office, almost 30 million working days were lost because of strikes. Look at the number by the time she left, it had plunged to under 2 million. From her point of view, she had made Britain governable again. Her Iron Lady attitude wasn't just for domestic policy. She was just as formidable on the world stage. She built this incredibly strong alliance with US President Ronald Reagan to stand up to the Soviet Union. But at the same time, she was one of the very first Western leaders to see potential in the Soviet reformer Mikhail Gorbachev. She also negotiated the future of Hong Kong with China. But there was one conflict, more than any other, that would define her time as prime minister. In 1982, Argentina's military junta invaded the Falkland Islands, a British territory thousands of miles away in the South Atlantic. A lot of people thought a military response was just impossible. But Thatcher? She didn't hesitate for a second. She sent a massive naval task force to retake the islands. It was a huge gamble that paid off big time, cementing her global reputation and creating this huge wave of patriotic support back home. But after 11 years, her time in power came to a sudden, dramatic end. And the legacy she left behind is one of the most fiercely debated topics in modern history. It still divides Britain right down the middle, even today. And here's the thing, she wasn't defeated by the opposition in an election. She was brought down by her own Conservative Party. A deeply unpopular new tax, nicknamed the poll tax, led to widespread protests. And at the same time, her increasingly hostile stance on Europe upset senior members of her own government, which led to a leadership challenge that forced her to resign in 1990. So how is she remembered? Well, it really, really depends on who you ask. For her supporters, she was a savior. She created a modern enterprise economy, she rolled back socialism, and she defeated the union powers that had crippled the country. But for her critics, she was a destroyer. She legitimized greed, widened the gap between rich and poor, and destroyed entire industries and the communities that depended on them. But the impact she had was tangible. I mean, take homeownership. Her flagship right-to-buy policy let millions of families living in public housing buy their homes for the very first time. This single policy caused home ownership to jump by 12%, and it completely reshaped the social fabric of the country. And maybe no quote better sums up her core philosophy than this one. To her critics, it was proof of an uncaring ideology that broke the country into millions of individuals. But for her supporters, it was a powerful statement about personal responsibility, a rejection of the idea that the government is the answer to all of our problems. So we're left with that central question. Was she the savior who modernized Britain, or the destroyer who fractured it? The very fact that we're still so passionately debating this question all these years later just proves how profoundly the grocer's daughter from Grantham, the Iron Lady, changed her country and the world.